Well, gentlemen, I guess it's time we get started on the preview of the 2024 edition of the third Saturday in October.
I don't know how it's very difficult to predict this. You just don't. Alabama, you don't know who's going to show up right now. I think they are due for come together. I think there's going to be something here that's going to start some cohesion, and they'll start learning their identity. I think they're in the middle, you the finding themselves, that kind of thing. So I think it'll be a better product in the field. They've got good players, good coaches. So the seeds of doubt, they're starting to figure some things out and learn from mistakes. So I got a feeling it'll be a little better product from Alabama this week. I really do think that.
Caleb, how are you feeling about the 2024 edition this year?
Yeah, I think I told y'all before the show too, but it's kind of a toss-up. I really don't know which way to lean at this point. Neither Tennessee nor Alabama have played up to what their talent should be. You look at Tennessee just on paper, their offense with five-star quarterback Nico Iamaleava at the helm should be rocking and rolling and scoring touchdowns, and it just hasn't. It hasn't clicked yet. So that makes me hesitant on the Vols. And then when you look at Alabama, they have the showing against Georgia, and then you contrast that with whatever happened in Nashville, and then also the showing against South Carolina and Shane Beamer. And this is also Kalen DeBoer's first true SEC road game. No offense to Vanderbilt, but that's not an SEC environment. When they get into Neyland Stadium, that will be a true SEC environment. Right. So I'm curious to see how they take that. I know Jalen Milroe is a veteran, and his ceiling is probably as high as any quarterback in college football, but he doesn't play to that ceiling a lot. So it just depends what Jalen Milroe Alabama gets and what offense Tennessee rolls out with to see how that game shapes out. But I know it'll be a crazy environment in Neyland Stadium, and definitely one that'll be an interesting watch.
Jalen's problem is, Jack and I talked the other day, and I've been watching it, and he's hanging on to the ball way too long. He's staying in the pocket. It needs to be 1-2, read, first read, second read, and then go get what you can get. And he's trying to back up, and anytime a quarterback's backing up and throwing as they're, it's a recipe for disaster. It's just not a good situation. So he needs to make a quick read, and then the fastest guy on the field, the best athlete on the field, just great athlete. Get what you can get. The thing I don't like with what he does is I don't like him leaning forward as he's getting tackled. I want him to do like the South Carolina quarterback and protect himself, get what you can get out of bounds or just slide. And he's hanging on to the ball way too long. Get what you can get.
And I think you hit it there, but Alabama will have – I was going to say Alabama will have the best two athletes on the field on Saturday. It's just a matter of getting, like you said, getting those athletes involved in the game.
Yeah, my thoughts on this game is the fact
that you already run away from some speed sweeps and little bubble screens and stuff like that. And then set up the pocket deep and stuff like that. But we're not seeing any of that. In Alabama, so many times against South Carolina, they were no backs, and our offensive line is just we were getting speed rushed, and he's backing up, and we always said move the pocket if they're pressing. Or you do some more RPO underneath and use their outside rush against them. The Utah pass or shuffle pass, whatever, is a great play, and I'm glad some teams have brought that back because that's a great play against outside rushes and things of that nature. So it's just a hodgepodge of crap right now.
That's the key to defeating us is that shuffle pass.
Yeah, we need to use it.
My thoughts on this game real quick. Sorry. When you talk about what Caleb said earlier about the contrasting strengths and weaknesses of these two teams, that's what I want to see is which weakness ends up being more apparent because we know Tennessee – Their defense is better than Alabama's by far. That is clear. Alabama's defense has been a problem. Giving up 40 to Vanderbilt. I guess you could say it was better against South Carolina. I just feel like that was more Lenore Sellers making a bunch of mistakes. But their defense is a problem, which has been rare for Alabama the last 20 years. But again, different coach. But so you have Tennessee offensively not that great. Alabama offensively has been fine for the most part. South Carolina game, but for the most part, it's been a good offensive team. So which weakness is going to be worse? Is Tennessee's offense going to struggle more against Bama's lukewarm defense, or will Alabama's defense allow Tennessee's offense to wake up and Bama's defense gets exposed? So, because everybody's been saying all season long, Nico, his downfield passing, that offense is going to light up Bama's defense. Well, Tennessee offensively has not looked that good recently. It's been kind of vanilla. It's been kind of a boring offense, which is shocking compared to what we saw at the beginning of that Oklahoma game. Tennessee is definitely capable of being a dangerous offense if it gets opened up and Nico that offense just starts rolling. But whichever team's weakness is worse is probably going to lose the game, whether it's Bama's defense or Tennessee's offense.
And I'm looking at the stats for Alabama. We're 12th in the conference in points allowed for the season. We're 14th in rushing yards allowed per game.
Adding penalties, third down conversions, fourth down conversions. And Tennessee ought to be looking at their shots. If Tennessee can get a rhythm with their play calling and player rotation and speeding the game up and not giving Alabama a lot of time to shuffle players and stuff like that, because I know Heupel, he likes to do the speed, high octane, high pace, fast pace.
Yeah.
If Alabama can counter that, slow it down.
Yeah, Tennessee's been doing pretty good on defense. Like they're only second in total yards allowed per game in the conference to Texas. That's pretty huge right there. If you're standing with Texas, you're good to go.
Yeah, and they're third in points allowed. I think it's just over 10 a game behind Texas, who I think is around 6. And then behind Ole Miss as well, who's I want to say, if I remember correctly, Tennessee's 10-7 on the points and Ole Miss is 10-6. So they're right there neck and neck for second in the conference. But that's really what it's been this year. Y'all mentioned it. For Tennessee's offense to get going, it has to stay ahead of the chains, and it hasn't been able to do that at all throughout this stretch. You look at the offensive line penalties. They never get a holding penalty, but false starts, illegal shifts, stuff like that has been killing Tennessee. And then when they do even if they do get rolling, like you look at the Florida game, Nico got 2 or 3 straight first downs. That tempo was back. Florida had a guy come up limp with all the injury stuff. Fans boo. Once he was done, once he got off the field, Tennessee's offense got back on the field. It was 3 straight sacks that pushed Tennessee out of field goal range and a punt. The offensive line, every step of the way for Tennessee this year, has come back to bite them and shot themselves in the foot. This weekend, too, Nico finally got that deep ball working and a couple of plays drawn up, had Squirrel White wide open twice, had Chaz Nimrod down the sideline open as well. He overthrew all 3 of those. Maybe a receiver misplayed 1 or 2. You can look at the film, and it's kind of 50-50. But either way, those receivers were open. So you're seeing glimpses of what the offense looked like under Hendon Hooker in 2022 when Tennessee did beat Alabama, and you're seeing those glimpses, but it hasn't been put together consistently yet. And I think this past weekend was the closest it's been since maybe the non-conference when you're beating up on Chattanooga and Kent State or even beating up on NC State. And this game against Florida was the closest, but it's still not there yet. So that's why you see the defense with the numbers it has now dominating as it has. And that's what's kept Tennessee in these games. You look at Arkansas, Tennessee ended up hitting Taylon Green so much he left the game hurt. This past weekend, Florida had to go with DJ Lagway because Graham Mertz, while it was non-contact, but still he was getting beat up in the backfield as well. I think in all 3 SEC games, Tennessee's defense has forced a backup quarterback into the game, whether it's Oklahoma's case where he's just playing bad or they're in the backfield so much. It's just you can't take that many hits in a game as a quarterback. So
that's been a big issue for tempo. That's been a big issue for tempo quarterbacks or tempo offenses. When you can run an offense well through tempo, that's great. But then if a player gets hurt or faking an injury, which we have seen a million times this season in the last few years, and you can't recover from that and go back out there and continue playing well on offense, then you're truly not a good offensive team or a great offensive team. You have to be able to, when the tempo gets slowed down, whether it's an injury or a player faking it. You got to be able to go out there and continue to play like you were when you were getting it rolling. Kind of like you said, they were having some tempo, and then the Florida player got hurt, and then 3 straight sacks. That's the next step for Tennessee's offense, is that they have to be able to, when something sets them back, whether it is a bad play or the tempo gets stopped, they can continue to play well on offense. Then they can become a great offensive team.
You'll learn this, or you may already know this, but the tempo is set with the offensive lineman. If your offensive linemen are not in, if they're not cohesive, if they're making mistakes and drawing penalties, that throws the tempo thing all out of kilter. So your tempo and the success of it starts with that offensive line. If they're not in rhythm, you can forget it.
It's kind of a twofold thing with the offensive line too. They're shooting Tennessee's offense in the foot, so that way they can't get the tempo rolling. And even if Tennessee didn't want to run tempo, if you start a drive with a 5-yard penalty, the first play of the game against Florida, Nico went deep and had a wide receiver wide open, connected on it. It would have been like a 45-yard pass, and you already started with a illegal formation. So you already start off, or an illegal man downfield, something on the offensive line. It was a legal man downfield because they had a couple of those where the offensive linemen are getting out to block guys who they have no business blocking, which is once again why I mentioned the offensive line has struggled to pass block, but when they get into run blocking, they're fine because they're going downhill. It's the getting into those pass sets where they've struggled. But yeah, it's twofold because when you're getting into tempo and the defensive line can't get set, it's easier to pass block. Well, the offensive line is hurting themselves. You can't get into tempo. Now the defensive line is rested and set, and then you're rolling. And also when you're not – yeah, and when you're not in – and when you're not in tempo, the defense can also sub. Like if your quarterback got sacked, like if Nico gets sacked and he's getting up off the ground, that gave Florida time to sub in fresh defensive linemen. And it was just a lose-lose situation for the offensive line. You saw it at Arkansas as well, where everything just kind of compounded. So I think it all starts in the trenches like any SEC football game, but especially for Tennessee with its offensive line. They either have to grow from last week or just find new guys, because it's been an issue under Josh Heupel's regime really at Tennessee that the offensive line isn't good or isn't up to snuff for SEC standards. But when you look at a guy like Hendon Hooker, he was able to, kind of mask some of that with how good he was and his pocket presence. And if the pocket broke down, he could run. And then a guy like Joe Milton last year, you saw some of those issues with the offensive line come to light even more. And now with a young quarterback who doesn't know yet how to deal with, SEC football, he's still learning as he's going. Those offensive line issues are really coming out.
With a great offensive line, Tennessee could have beaten Georgia that year with Hendon Hooker. But they had no shot because Hooker couldn't do anything.
Yep. If you give the quarterback in Josh Heupel's offense a chance, then, that offense will go miles for you. And especially with the way he's able to use the run game. You talk about 2022. The run game, even that year, nobody talks about it as much, was still dominant. But if you don't have a pass game to complement it with, you can't go anywhere. This year is 2022 was the most 50-50 Heupel has ever been at Tennessee with pass and run. They were really close to the 50-50 mark. Last year, they slowed it down a good bit, went more 60-40 run. This year is the most they've run the ball. They're almost approaching 70% run, which is near but coming into Florida week, I haven't checked since, but coming into Florida week, they were sub 120 in college football for passing percentage per game. And it's just trying to get where Nico can have time in the pocket. When he has time, he rips it. He did have a pick against Florida, which was a freshman mistake, try to fit it into tight coverage. But when he has time, he's able to rip the ball down the field. He just doesn't have time.
Well, and you said a little while ago that the penalties have just been a killer for Tennessee. It killed you against Arkansas. You had 10 penalties against them. What was the key to not getting so much penalties? Like, what's the plan for the Vols this Saturday?
Truthfully, it's just kind of everybody playing on the same page. You look at that Arkansas game, you can say crowd noise got into it a little bit. And, that's a valid argument. But that offensive line, they're not freshmen. You've got a senior who returned to play right tackle. You've got both your guards are upperclassmen. Your center is a senior. The youngest guy on that offensive line is 5-star Lance Hurd, who transferred in from LSU, and he's at left tackle. And he was penalized, but John Campbell Jr. on the right side was penalized just as much. So truthfully, it's just everybody getting on the same page and some of those offensive linemen locking in. I've talked about it, and I'll say it again, but this year with a younger quarterback who isn't as smart as Hendon Hooker yet to have that instinct of, hey, this pocket's collapsing, I got to go. he's still learning that. And you see it with all freshman quarterbacks. You saw it a lot, I think, this past weekend with South Carolina's quarterback Sellers. These SEC defensive linemen, you can't spin out of those sacks. When those guys get you, you're done. So I think he's still learning that, and Hendon knew that. But it exposes this offensive line, and just you see it over and over. I mean, you look at – if you watch the all-22, there's receivers open everywhere, but Nico doesn't have time to get deep into his reads. And truthfully, at this point, I think he's seeing ghosts. That Oklahoma game, he got strip sacked twice from his blind side. Tennessee recovered one, lost one. It didn't end up hurting them. Arkansas, I think you could kind of feel that even when he had a pocket, he felt rushed. And you have a young quarterback who's now feeling rushed in the pocket. That's going to push you into some mistakes when you don't need to be. You look at that last play where he ran out of bounds. He could have stayed in the pocket, 1-2 ticks more before escaping. But I just feel like he's seen ghost. He's rushed. All this goes back to, like you mentioned, it starts with the penalties, Tennessee getting behind the chains, and it goes all around. It's just stuff that Tennessee doesn't need to be doing. There's unnecessary roughness calls that get them half the distance to the goal. When you force a punt, now you're half the distance to the goal, and unnecessary roughness on a fair caught punt. You're not even running it back. It's just all around. And Josh Heupel's had issues with penalties. His teams have been penalized in the past. I don't think it's a discipline thing. It's just more so like dumb football mistakes. So
yeah, sometimes you can't blame the coach when a player makes it. When players
speed of the play calling. I mean, if you're running a kind of offense, and that's going to be always bring in a little issue.
When you have a coach, and you have a team with a lot of penalties, a really good coach in Josh Heupel, sometimes you can't blame the coach because sometimes it's just the players that you have. Because you said that the offensive line has all those experienced guys, seniors, upperclassmen, and they're still making those mistakes. They're probably never going to learn. So really the only really chance that you're going to get is when you get new offensive linemen in the future that maybe they'll be better than the ones that are currently there. I mean, sometimes you could say it is a coaching issue. Maybe it is. But still, sometimes it's just, even if you teach the players the right thing to do, the coaching staff's really good. The players just aren't the guys that Tennessee has, especially on that offensive line. They're just not getting it done. And they've been in college for years. They should know better, but they still aren't doing it. So it could just be a player issue, not a coaching issue. It's sometimes hard to tell, but that seems to be what's going on.
And coming into this season, one of the big talking points was the fact that Nico would have this veteran line. I think him with senior center Cooper Mays has helped to an extent because Cooper is able to kind of take some of that weight off of Nico's shoulders. Because, I mean, when you're a veteran quarterback, you're expected to read the defense, see what they're in. Do you need to stick in the play call or not? What protection do you need to run? What's happening? And especially with Tennessee's RPO up tempo, not only do you have to do all that, but now you have to do it in 15 seconds instead of 40 seconds. So, I mean, all of that's going through your head. Having a senior center like Cooper Mays take some of that weight off of Nico, and the expectation was having 3 other junior offensive linemen to flank Cooper Mays plus Lance Hurd, who's a massive sophomore, would also take some of that weight off of Nico. And it's been the opposite because now he's kind of rushed. He's seeing ghosts. They're not in the protections they need to be. And once again, run blocking, when Dylan Sampson has the ball in his hands and those guys are getting downfield, they are perfectly fine. It's just whenever they get in those pass sets, you see the grades on PFF drop. Cooper Mays has been the highest graded pass blocker, and usually a running back is behind him every week. It's just Javonte Spraggins at guard was a guy that had high expectations, could be a top 5 round draft pick in the NFL draft, and he just hasn't played up to what he was last year. So it's just all of those things combined has kind of, and I think the expectation that the veterans would do well has just kind of let everybody down on Tennessee's front. But like I said, it all starts with this offensive line, and then it's hard to pin blame on anybody else. I mean, you've had receivers drop balls. They're not getting open as much, but it doesn't matter because Nico's sacked. So you can't really say, hey, no wide receivers were open when Nico's running for his life in the pocket.
True.